الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. So in the last round of dialogue, the topic of the paper I presented was what does it mean to belong to a Muslim community? So almost along the same lines, I'm going to speak about rights and responsibilities of men and women of faith, focusing on the theme of dignity, as the dialogue is the theme of dignity. My paper and presentation will have three parts. In the first part, I will speak about the inherent and acquired dignity in Shi'a Islamic thought, and then I will discuss about our responsibility as men and women of faith to protect our inherent dignity and to acquire and elevate the dignity of ourselves and of other men and women of faith. So, based on Islamic teachings, human beings enjoy two kinds of dignity: the dignity that is inherent and the dignity that is acquired. According to the Holy Quran, God created human beings in the best form. He intended for them to be His vicegerents or viceroys on earth. There is some discussion on this verse. As you see, the verse says, I'm going to set a viceroy on the earth. It doesn't say a viceroy of myself. So some people have said whether this is God's viceroy or is it viceroy of the past generations. Some Sunni interpreters have said that this is not God's viceroy. One of them being Ibn Taymiyyah, who was the father of Salafi Wahhabi Islamic branch. But Shi'i commentators, including Allama Tabatabai, have clearly stated that this, according to the evidence that he provides, that this is God's viceroy, not the viceroy of past existent beings or creatures that existed on the earth. Anyways. And then we read that God breathed into human beings, into the first human being of His own spirit. When we said to the angels, prostrate, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so I don't have this verse on. God breathed into a human being of His own spirit. This is another verse of the Holy Quran. God commanded all the angels to prostrate themselves before the first human being. And He taught him, so this is the verse which speaks of God breathing into a human being of His own spirit. And God taught him all the names, a kind of knowledge that even the angels lacked. And He taught Adam the names, all of them, then presented them to the angels and said, tell me the names of these. If you're truthful, they said, immaculate are you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. Indeed, you're all-knowing, the all-wise. So, So this is about inherent human dignity. Of course, one can find many other evidence. So just a few passages of the Holy Quran. So these and other indications in the Muslim tradition show us the inherent dignity bestowed by God upon human beings out of God's mercy. And as you can see, we didn't have any right to have this kind of dignity because we didn't exist before God created us. And of course, we didn't have any responsibility to earn it, again, because we didn't exist. Of course, we have the choice to protect this inherent dignity or to lose it and be relegated to the lowest of the low, as chapter 95, verse 5 indicates. Now, the second kind of dignity is the acquired dignity, which is the dignity we're able to acquire through our actions and add to our inherent God-given dignity. From the Islamic viewpoint, men and women of faith, we have two main responsibilities. First, we have a responsibility to protect and elevate our own personal dignity, and second, we're responsible to protect and elevate the dignity of other believers. Now, with regard to elevating the dignity of ourselves, our tradition provides us with a set of instructions as to how we should preserve and elevate our own personal dignity. We are taught that dignity is inextricably and interestingly linked to the concept of humbleness. Anyone who humbles himself before God will be elevated in dignity and honor. Our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, peace be upon him, is quoted to have said, "There are two angels in heaven in charge of God's servants. They elevate whoever shows humbleness for the sake of God, and relegate whoever shows arrogance." Now, let me ask our Christian friends, do you know what is the highest status or position a human being can have? Have you heard about Shi'a viewpoint in this regard?
So are you asking that question as in comparison to what you're saying, or what we think?
No.
From our theological perspective?
No, from our perspective. Have you heard what is the greatest position that a human being can have?
Oneness with God.
Oneness with God. Or in more traditional Shi'a terms, the position of imamate or imama, this is even higher than reaching the position of oneness with God, because that, other people also can reach. But the position of imama, becoming an imam, is the highest position a human being can ever have. But then,
But what does it mean, sorry, to be imam? I mean, the mosque or?
No.
Okay.
Imam not in the sense of being the leader of congregational prayer, but in the sense of the 12 imams that we have, the position that those 12 had, and other people before them. But what I want to mention here is that do you know what happens when a person reaches that exalted position? I mean, what kind of feeling or experience does he go through? So when an imam passes away and a new imam is going to reach that position, what personal experience does he go through? Sorry?
Humility, profound humility.
Well done. So, we are told in tradition that it's an experience of unprecedented humbleness towards God. In this tradition, our 10th Imam is in Medina. His father is in Baghdad. Okay, on the day when his father passes away, suddenly people who were around the 10th Imam hear him saying, "We belong to Allah and to Him we return. Abu Ja'far passed away." Abu Ja'far is the name or the tiknonym of his father. So he realizes that his father in Baghdad passes away. Note that this is the moment when he's actually reaching this position of imamah, because the last imam passed away. People become surprised. How did you know that? The imam says, because I experienced a kind of humbleness towards God that I had never known. So this is very interesting. Similarly, we're told in another hadith that God told Prophet Moses, Prophet Musa, as we say, peace be upon him, "Do you know why I chose you? Why I chose you to be my for speaking with me and not the rest of my creation? I searched the hearts of my servants, and I did not find anyone humbler before me than you." So this humbleness of Prophet Moses made him reach that high position that he would talk to God. We are instructed to be humble not only before God, but also before other men and women of faith. Our 11th Imam is reported to have said, "Whoever humbles himself in this world before his brother is indeed one of the truthful before God and one of the true followers of Ali," the Shi'a Ali. Just as humbleness increases our dignity, arrogance leads to disgrace and humiliation. The Quran tells us that the reason why Satan was ousted from heaven was his arrogance. In chapter 7, verse 13, we read that when Satan, verses 12 to 13, we read that when Satan refused to prostrate himself before Adam, God told him, "What prevented you from prostrating when I commanded you?" Satan said, "I am better than him. You created me from fire and created him from clay." God said, "Get down from it. It is not for you to be arrogant therein. Begone, you are indeed among the degraded ones." As this verse indicates, the arrogant are deprived of the dignity of being in heaven with the angels and the presence of God. Another verse of the Holy Quran states this more emphatically. We read that, "Indeed, those who deny our signs and treat them with arrogance, the gates of the heaven will not be opened for them, nor shall they enter paradise until the camel passes through the needle's eye." This is just saying it's impossible for them to enter heaven. Not only the arrogant will be refused entry to heaven, but also God's humiliating punishment will be awaiting them in the hereafter. According to a hadith from Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, on the day of judgment, the arrogant will be transformed into small ants, and people will step on them until God finishes the reckoning. Another character trait that is closely related to dignity in our tradition is taqwa, which is translated as God-wariness, piety, fear of God, and so forth. The Quran tells us that God-wariness is in fact the criterion of dignity or nobility, not things like race, tribal affiliation, or gender. Chapter 49, verse 13 states, O mankind, indeed we created you from a male and a female and made you nations and tribes that you may recognize one another. Indeed, the noblest of you in the sight of Allah is the most God-wary. Sorry, the word God-wary is omitted. A tradition from our fourth Imam states that there is no nobility for a person from the tribe of Quraysh. This was the tribe that was a very noble tribe at the time of the Prophet. Or an Arab. Arabs had their dignity and honor. Except by humbleness, and there is no dignity except by God-wariness. Apart from humbleness and God-wariness, one can find many other instructions in Shia Islamic tradition as to things that can increase our personal dignity. For example, the night prayer, which is a special prayer performed before dawn, is said to be the dignity of a believer, or despairing of people's wealth, which means trying not to depend on other people financially and not asking them for anything, are counted among the sources of a believer's dignity. We are also instructed to avoid doing things or being in places or situations that could harm our dignity, such as wearing improper clothes or attending sinful gatherings. In general, protecting and elevating one's personal dignity is an obligation of every believer, unless there's a greater obligation involved for which one has to sacrifice one's dignity or reputation. Now, about elevating and protecting the dignity of other men and women of faith, we are strongly prohibited from doing things that that would tarnish the reputation of others, such as slandering, mocking, or backbiting. Sorry for this presentation has problems. Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, when a believer slanders his brother, faith disappears in his heart, just as salt disappears in water. Chapter 24, verse 23 warns that those who falsely accuse innocent women of adultery shall be cursed in this world and the hereafter, and there shall be a great punishment for them. According to the Quran, backbiting is equal to eating the flesh of one's dead brother. And that's this. Do not backbite one another. Will any of you love to eat the flesh of his dead brothers? Even listening to backbiting is prohibited in our tradition. The one who listens to backbiting is said to be equal in sin with the backbiter. We are also told not to expose the sins that other believers may commit in private, up to 70 grave sins. I mean, should not disclose or dispose them. Of course, we have to talk to the sinner and warn them of their wrongdoing, but this has to be done in private in a way that other people do not find out about the sin, and then the dignity and reputation of even the sinner is not tarnished. Not only we have to avoid humiliating believers, but also we have to defend their reputation if someone is humiliating them in our presence. A hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam indicates, he in whose presence a believer is humiliated and he can defend him but does not do so, will be humiliated by God on the day of judgment in the presence of all creation. We mentioned that in order to preserve our own personal dignity, we have to avoid asking other people for anything. But we are commanded at the same time that if we realize a believer is in need of help, we should help them immediately and do not wait until they ask us. We have to try to preserve the dignity of those in need and do not make them lower themselves before us by asking us for something. According to a hadith from Imam Sadiq, doing good to someone is when you initiate it, but when you give someone after they ask you for it, you're just giving them the price of the reputation that they spent before you. Apart from the duty of protecting and the dignity of men and women of faith in general, honoring and preserving the dignity of certain groups of people are especially emphasized in Shia Islamic tradition. For example, teachers. We are taught to respect and honor our teachers. Our fourth Imam, Imam Sajjad, peace be upon him, is reported to have said, "The right of your teacher is to exalt him, honor his session, to listen to him carefully, pay him full attention, not to raise your voice over his, and not to talk to anyone in his session." We are also commanded to honor the elderly. Our sixth Imam is reported to have said, "Verily, exalting an elderly man is a form of exalting God." In another hadith we read, "He who humiliates an elderly believer, God will send someone to humiliate him before his death." So in summary and in conclusion, from a Shia Muslim perspective, men and women of faith are responsible to be grateful for the inherent dignity that God has bestowed upon them, and to try to preserve and increase their own personal dignity and the dignity of other men and women of faith. May God help us all in achieving this goal.